Anita and Rajesh Kumar have been married for 35 years, a lifetime that neighbors described as calm and ordinary. They shared a small home, modest routines, and a sense of quiet stability that made them almost invisible in their community. But everything changed the day Rajesh won a dusty wooden box at a local auction for just $50. Inside lay a royal artifact valued at nearly $700,000, an object that would awaken greed, secrecy, and a darkness no one could have imagined. What began as a stroke of luck soon spiraled into betrayal, deception, and a shocking crime that would shatter their decades-long life together. For 35 years, the couple lived a life that blended quietly into the background of their neighborhood. Their marriage began when both were young, shaped by modest dreams and simple expectations. Over time, their days settled into predictable patterns. Mornings started early, evenings ended the same way, and weekends passed without excitement. They were not known for passion or conflict, only for consistency. To outsiders, they represented endurance rather than romance. Money was always handled carefully. Every expense was considered, every purchase delayed until absolutely necessary. They never traveled far, never upgraded their home, and never chased luxuries. This cautious way of living became part of who they were. Neighbors often described them as practical and disciplined, people who knew how to survive without asking for help. Their home reflected this mindset, filled with old furniture, faded photographs, and objects kept more out of habit than affection. As the years passed, the emotional distance between them slowly grew. Conversations became shorter, more functional, focused on routines rather than feelings. They shared space, not thoughts. Still, there was no open hostility. Silence became their agreement, a quiet understanding built over decades. The wife believed stability was enough, trusting that time itself was proof of commitment. She rarely questioned the life they had built together. The husband, however, carried unspoken frustrations. He felt overlooked by the world and trapped by the limits of his own choices. While he never voiced resentment, it lived beneath his calm exterior. He watched others succeed, accumulate wealth, and escape ordinary lives, while he remained stuck in sameness. Yet, he continued playing the role expected of him, dependable and unremarkable. Nothing in their routine hinted at disaster. Their marriage, though fated, seemed harmless. No one imagined that behind this quiet existence, desire and greed were slowly. The auction took place in a small, aging hall on the edge of town, a place known for clearing out forgotten estates rather than uncovering treasures. The husband attended out of routine, not excitement. He had visited similar auctions before, usually leaving with nothing or a cheap household item that saved a few dollars. That day felt no different. The room was filled with mismatched chairs, dusty boxes, and people searching for bargains rather than history. As the auction progressed, item after item sold quickly with little interest. Toward the end, a small wooden box was brought forward. It was worn, sealed, and marked only with a faded label suggesting decorative value. No one paid much attention. The box showed signs of age, but nothing that suggested importance. Most bidders were already distracted, ready to leave. When the bidding opened, there was almost no response. The husband raised his hand without thinking, offering a low price simply because the item looked unusual. No one challenged him. The auctioneer closed the sale within seconds. For $50, the box was his. It felt like an insignificant win, barely worth mentioning, and he carried it out with no sense of excitement. At home, the box was placed on a table and left untouched for days. Life continued as usual. Meals were prepared, chores were completed, and the purchase was forgotten. The husband felt no urgency to examine it. It was just another object, another small gamble that meant nothing. Eventually, curiosity overcame indifference. When the box was finally opened, its contents looked strange and unfamiliar. The object inside appeared old, carefully crafted, and far too detailed to be ordinary. Though he didn't yet understand its importance, a quiet sense of possibility settled in his mind. That simple auction, once meaningless, had unknowingly marked the moment when his ordinary life began to change. The discovery unfolded slowly, without drama at first. Unsure of what he was looking at, the husband searched for information in old books, online archives, and auction records. The object did not match common antiques. Its symbols, craftsmanship, and materials suggested something far older and far more valuable. What began as mild curiosity soon turned into nervous excitement as each detail pointed toward a hidden past. Eventually, the artifact reached the attention of specialists. Their assessments were cautious but intense. Tests were ordered, historical references examined, and comparisons made with missing pieces from royal collections long thought lost. The conclusion was undeniable. The object was authentic, connected to a royal lineage, and preserved in remarkable condition. Its estimated value approached $700,000. The figure felt unreal, impossible to connect to a purchase made for pocket change. The news spread quickly beyond the couple's home. Appraisers, collectors, and intermediaries expressed interest. Calls and messages increased. The husband, once invisible, now felt watched and valued. Attention followed him wherever he went, and with it came a sense of power he had never experienced. For the first time, his life seemed capable of changing overnight. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted. The wife reacted with disbelief, then cautious concern. The sudden value brought questions rather than joy. She worried about safety, legality, and the consequences of such attention. The husband, however, focused only on possibility. He imagined debts erased, new surroundings, and a future free from limitations. As days passed, the artifact became more than an object. It became a symbol of escape. The husband began guarding it obsessively, locking doors, hiding documents, and controlling information. What had once been shared between two people now belonged only to him. Greed did not arrive suddenly. It settled in quietly, feeding on every thought the husband had about the future. The artifact stopped being a shared miracle and became a private obsession. He began calculating its value against every year he felt ignored, every sacrifice he believed he had made. The marriage, once seen as a lifelong bond, slowly transformed in his mind into a weight that kept him tied to an old, unremarkable life. He grew increasingly protective of the artifact, checking its hiding place multiple times a day. Sleep became restless, filled with anxious thoughts about theft, exposure, or legal trouble. Each worry pushed him further inward. The wife noticed the change. His routines shifted, his patience thinned, and his silence became heavy. What once felt like calm now felt tense, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The idea of sharing the wealth began to disturb him. He imagined arguments, claims, and obligations that could drain the fortune before it ever reached his hands. Long years of compromise suddenly felt unfair. He convinced himself that the artifact belonged to him alone, earned by chance but protected by his actions. The thought of dividing it felt like losing it. As interest from outsiders grew, so did his fear of losing control. Every inquiry felt like a threat. Every suggestion of selling legally or involving authorities sounded like a trap. His trust in others disappeared, including trust in the woman who had shared his life for decades. He started seeing her not as a partner, but as a risk. Greed reshaped his thinking completely. Moral boundaries blurred, replaced by justification. He told himself that this opportunity would never come again, that ordinary rules no longer applied. The artifact promised freedom, status, and escape. With each passing day, the desire to protect that promise grew stronger, pushing compassion aside and planting the first seeds of something irreversible. The husband's actions became deliberate and methodical. What had once been restless thinking turned into quiet preparation. He began paying close attention to daily patterns, noting times, movements, and habits with unsettling focus. Nothing was written down, nothing spoken aloud. Everything existed only in his mind, carefully arranged and adjusted as days passed. He made efforts to appear unchanged to the outside world. His behavior in public stayed polite and calm. Routine tasks were completed as usual. This normal appearance gave him confidence, reinforcing the belief that no one suspected anything. Behind closed doors, however, his thoughts revolved around control and certainty. Every possible outcome was considered, every risk weighed against the reward waiting at the end. The artifact was moved several times, hidden in places that felt increasingly secure. He gathered documents, took photographs, and memorized details needed for future transactions. Private inquiries were made using indirect channels, avoiding attention. Each step was taken slowly, patiently, as if time itself was an ally. The plan was not rushed. He believed careful timing would erase doubt and suspicion. At the same time, emotional distance hardened into resolve. He stopped seeing the wife as someone who shared his past. Instead, she became an obstacle to his imagined future. Years of shared memories were reduced to inconvenience. He convinced himself that drastic action was not cruelty, but necessity. This belief allowed him to move forward without hesitation. What made the plan most dangerous was how ordinary everything looked. There were no visible signs of chaos or conflict. The home remained quiet, routines intact. Beneath that surface, however, a decision had already been made. The husband was no longer thinking about whether to act, only about when. By the time the plan reached its final shape, there was no turning back. The husband's actions became deliberate and methodical. What had once been restless thinking turned into quiet preparation. He began paying close attention to daily patterns, noting times, movements, and habits with unsettling focus. Nothing was written down, nothing spoken aloud. Everything existed only in his mind, carefully arranged and adjusted as days passed. He made efforts to appear unchanged to the outside world. His behavior in public stayed polite and calm. Routine tasks were completed as usual. This normal appearance gave him confidence, reinforcing the belief that no one suspected anything. Behind closed doors, however, his thoughts revolved around control and certainty. Every possible outcome was considered, every risk weighed against the reward waiting at the end. The artifact was moved several times, hidden in places that felt increasingly secure. He gathered documents, took photographs, and memorized details needed for future transactions. Private inquiries were made using indirect channels, avoiding attention. Each step was taken slowly, patiently, as if time itself was an ally. The plan was not rushed. He believed careful timing would erase doubt and suspicion. At the same time, emotional distance hardened into resolve. He stopped seeing the wife as someone who shared his past. Instead, she became an obstacle to his imagined future. Years of shared memories were reduced to inconvenience. He convinced himself that drastic action was not cruelty, but necessity. This belief allowed him to move forward without hesitation. What made the plan most dangerous was how ordinary everything looked. There were no visible signs of chaos or conflict. The home remained quiet, routines intact. Beneath that surface, however, a decision had already been made. The husband was no longer thinking about whether to act, only about when. By the time the plan reached its final shape, there was no turning back. The first doubts emerged quietly, almost by accident. A routine review of documents revealed small inconsistencies that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. Dates did not align as cleanly as they should have. Minor financial movements appeared shortly before the death, subtle enough to avoid immediate attention, but unusual given the couple's history of cautious spending. These details alone meant little, but together they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. Investigators began to retrace the final weeks of the wife's life. Neighbors mentioned changes in behavior, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now carried weight. The husband had been seen making late trips, handling packages with unusual care, and securing parts of the house that had never been locked before. None of this proved wrongdoing, but it challenged the image of an ordinary household untouched by conflict. Attention soon turned toward the artifact. Records showed it had been quietly evaluated and discreetly offered to private buyers. These actions occurred before the wife's death, contradicting the husband's claims of emotional shock and confusion. The timeline suggested planning rather than coincidence. Investigators questioned why such steps were taken in secrecy and why urgency surrounded the sale. Forensic experts revisited the scene with fresh perspective. New tests revealed traces that had previously gone unnoticed. What was once considered natural now appeared questionable. The cause of death no longer seemed as clear as it had initially appeared. Each re-examination uncovered another overlooked detail, slowly shifting the narrative. As pressure increased, the husband's behavior changed. He became defensive, inconsistent, and visibly anxious. The calm image he had maintained for months began to fracture. What once appeared to be grief now looked rehearsed. The more investigators uncovered, the final truth emerged through a combination of forensic certainty and undeniable evidence. Advanced testing confirmed that the wife's death was not natural nor accidental. Substances found in her body pointed directly to deliberate action, carefully administered to avoid immediate detection. The quiet scene that once suggested peace was redefined as calculated silence. What had been hidden behind routine and familiarity was finally exposed. Financial records completed the picture. The husband had taken decisive steps to secure ownership of the artifact alone, preparing documents and contacts long before the death occurred. These actions erased any remaining doubt about motive. The royal artifact, once dismissed as a harmless curiosity, became the center of the investigation. It represented not only wealth, but the reason a 35-year marriage was reduced to a transaction. When confronted with the evidence, the carefully constructed image collapsed. The calm widower narrative could no longer stand against science and documentation. Every protective measure he had taken now worked against him, revealing intent rather than innocence. The artifact was seized, its value no longer a promise of freedom, but proof of guilt. The case shocked the public. A life spent quietly had ended in betrayal driven by greed. The length of the marriage made the crime harder to accept, forcing many to question how well anyone can truly know another person. What appeared stable for decades had been undone by a single opportunity. In the end, the artifact was returned to rightful historical custody, stripped of the power it once held over the husband. The fortune he imagined never belonged to him. Instead, it exposed the darkest part of his character. The story closed with a grim reminder that greed does not arrive loudly. It waits patiently, and when awakened, it can destroy everything in its path.